today's video, we're going to be talking about chemical reactions. Chemical reactions happen when two or more substances rearrange their atoms to become new substances. So you have two things, they come together, they interact, and at the end you have new substances, stuff you didn't have when you started with. They can be any combination of elements, compounds, mixtures, etc. So you can have two elements that react, you can have an element and a compound that react, you can have a compound and a mixture, you can have two mixtures, you can have any combination, and it can be more than two. So you can have three elements or two elements and a mixture. So basically at least two things, any combination of these. One more thing you need to remember is the law of conservation of mass. Basically this means the amount of mass is the same before and after the reaction. So if you have 20 grams of materials, maybe 15 of a liquid and 5 of a solid, after the reaction you'll have 20 grams of materials. But they could be now 5 of a liquid, 10 of a solid, and 5 of a gas. So the amount of mass is the same, the total number, but the form could be different. So whatever you had before and after reaction, the number will be the same, but the mass could look different. Okay? So the mass is conserved, it stays the same. The properties of the new substance can be the same or completely different. So we talked about this in the compounds video, that when your compounds are created and changed, that the properties can be the same or different. So sodium, which is an element, is a silver metal that reacts with water and it's flammable, and chlorine is a poisonous gas. But when they react and they make a new substance called salt, it is white rock and it's not flammable and it's not poisonous. So the properties can be completely different than what you started with, or they can be kind of similar. It just depends on the material you're working with. Okay. In a chemical reaction, there will always be some sort of evidence that it happened. So if you mix a couple of things together and you're not sure if it counts as a reaction or not, you're going to look and see if there's any evidence that a chemical reaction occurred. And the way we're going to remember that is please excuse coughs, sneezes, and burps. That's how you remember the 5 types of evidence that you could have that a chemical reaction happened. We're going to go through each of those. So please stands for precipitate, and this means a solid. So if you mix chemicals together and at the end you have this new solid substance that you didn't have before, it kind of appeared out of nowhere, that's a precipitate. This does not mean like rain or snow, that's precipitation. Precipitate is a solid. So for example, there are some liquids you can mix and they react, and when you're done, if you look in your beaker you'll have liquid, but you'll also have this stuff floating around. The stuff floating around is a solid, so that's your precipitate. So if you have a new solid at the end that you didn't have to start with, that's a precipitate. This one's probably the hardest one to remember. Excuse stands for energy. So in a chemical reaction, energy is almost always involved. It can be taken in, so you can gain energy, or you can give off energy. And this energy can be light, sound, heat, motion. There's different types of energy, and it could be one or many. So in a chemical reaction, say if you have fire, you're giving off light, heat, the fire kind of moves, that's the motion. The fire can make like wood, it makes it crackle, that can be sound. And so in a fire, you have a bunch of different types. Or in a more simple reaction, you may just give off some heat. So the energy that's given off or taken in can be one or many different types of energy. COFS stands for color change. This is probably the most basic one. If the color of your substance changes, then you most likely had a chemical reaction. If you have blue liquid and you add something to it and it turns pink or green or clear, that's a color change and you had a chemical reaction more than likely. Sneezes stands for smell change. So if you smell a substance beforehand and you smell it afterwards and it smells very different, that could be a chemical reaction. Make sure if you're smelling chemicals that you waft it, that you don't just sniff it like directly in the beaker, you waft it, because some of the chemicals could be dangerous, or it could irritate your nose or your lungs. So just make sure you walk to be safe. And then lastly is burps, and that stands for bubbles or gas. So if you mix things together and it gives off bubbles or gas comes off, then more than likely you had a chemical reaction. So again, this plays into the conservation of mass, because a lot of times students will measure the mass beforehand and afterwards, and they're different. And that's because there's gas given off that escaped, and they couldn't measure the gas that they lost. So gas is given off pretty frequently.